My name's Andrea Barlow with NES, for those of you who don't know me. If you were involved in the project last year, since 2020, you will be familiar with me, but I'll introduce myself again and our team in a second. But Dan from the city is going to speak first.
Thank you, Andrea. So hopefully everybody can hear me here. Yes? Good and back. Great. Okay. Well, so my name, as Andrea had mentioned, my name is Daniel Sexton. I am the case planner that's assigned to this project for land use review, and I will be facilitating the project's review from kind of its initial considerations here today all the way up through all the public hearings between Planning Commission and City Council. So just a couple things I want to just note on before I hand it over to the project team to really kind of go into greater detail of what they're proposing with this latest application. So tonight is an informational meeting for you, just as it is for the project team. It's an opportunity for you all to get information about what they're currently proposing. I know for many of you, this is a replay of what was discussed a year ago. For others, it's a new project that they haven't heard anything about. So I just want to make sure that everybody is respectful of everybody. I know when Andrea opens it up for questions, I'd like to make sure that we're keeping, one person speaking at a time, just to be respectful of everybody. So, a couple things about the process. With this project, there are two applications that are being considered. There's a land use application for a rezone of the property to allow a set of proposed uses. And then there is a conceptual plan that lays out very generically how those uses and how kind of site design and layout will work. The project team can get into that more specifically. For many of you that are familiar with the project, last year there were 3 applications. There was a master plan amendment with this project. When it went through approval sequencing with Planning Commission and City Council last year, City Council did approve the master plan. So the master plan does set forth the possibility to be able to develop this site or portions of this site with residential uses. So that master plan application is not up for consideration. That has been approved. It's on the books. That was what we will use as staff as kind of a guiding plan for the site. Also, for many of you, you're aware that with the project being denied over a year ago, according to City Code, any project applicant or proponent has the legal right after a 12-month time to bring that same project back. And so that is what we are considering right now. It's another consideration. They've waited the 12 months. They've resubmitted their project applications. They will be reviewed objectively as if it was a new project. Now, concurrently, there is also an appeal that the property owner and project team is working through the court system. That is a separate process, has no bearing on our consideration of the land use applications here that we're going to talk about today. So just think of those as 2 separate processes, and I'll let Andrea and members of the project team kind of speak to that in their presentation. So again, I will be around to answer questions when we get to that portion, or am happy to answer those questions after the conclusion of the meeting here tonight. But I would just encourage, again, everybody to be respectful of each other and take this as an opportunity to gain some additional information about what's being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So now I'm going to introduce Joe Hooker, who is here on behalf of the property owner. He's just going to say a few words first, and then I've got a brief PowerPoint presentation just to set the background for people, especially who aren't familiar with the project, and to explain what we're proposing, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Joe Hooker, and I am the project manager for 2424 Garden of the Gods. I've been assigned this effort to oversee the rezoning and concept plan submission, and if successful, I will also be the project manager for the future planning work with the city, and ultimately the planning and implementation of the project if it is lucky enough to get that far along. The reason we are submitting the rezoning is we feel it's important to have a comprehensive, unified plan for the entire parcel. That is something that hasn't changed from our first submission, and therefore we are bringing the project back in hopes of having that unified vision for the entire property. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, because we do have a limited amount of time and want to make sure that we provide the opportunity for all of you to have your opportunity to speak. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So for those of you who may not be familiar with where the site is located, it is at the intersection of Garden of the Gods Road, West Garden of the Gods Road, and 30th Street. So it is the existing, what is often known as the MCI building and the surrounding area. So the site, the property is approximately 120 acres. So it includes a lot more than just the building and the existing parking lot. It includes an overflow parking lot and some open space areas, which is effectively going up to the ridge line to the west. So the existing zoning for the property has multiple different zones. So the primary zone that it's currently in is PIP1, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but that's Planned Industrial Park. So that's the zoning for the area in purple. There is a small area at the north side, which is PUD, which is actually zoned PUD with the adjacent residential subdivision. And then there is a strip on the west side, which is zoned agriculture. So that whole, the property is in 3 different zones, and per Joe's comments, one of our goals here is to get it into one comprehensive zoning district. So in order to do that, we are proposing a rezone of the property to PUD. Now PUD is a planned unit development, and the purpose of a PUD is to do just that, to have a unified planned approach to a development, but that can incorporate a number of different types of uses. So PUD is our proposed zoning. We're proposing some residential on this, multifamily residential. We have, so as you may recall, when we went through the process in 2020, 2021, we started with a much higher number and we came down with our density. And our starting point now is our finishing point last time. So what we presented to City Council is where we're starting today. So we're starting with a proposed density cap of 420 units. That's a 16 unit per acre maximum density. So that's not a particularly high density for multifamily. Usually you're in the 25 to 30 units per acre range. Other standards we have carried forward from the PIP zone. So with the PUD, you can actually pretty much determine your own standards. You can determine the height that you want, the setbacks that you want, but we decided that we wanted to keep the same principles as were in the PIP1 zone. So that includes the 45-foot maximum height. And with that, I'll just emphasize that this is in the hillside area. It is still in the hillside. We're not proposing to remove the hillside overlay zoning. So the hillside overlay zoning still applies to the property. 50-foot front setback, 30-foot side setback, 50-foot rear setback. So they are the setbacks that are currently on the PIP1 zone. And in addition to that, there is a requirement for a 100-foot setback when it's adjacent to a residential area. So on that north side, on this north side, adjacent to the residential, there's a requirement for a 100-foot setback. And when I say setback, that means a building setback. So you can put parking in the building setback, but you can't put buildings in that area. And then the maximum lot coverage of 40%. So these are the uses, and we went through this before, but as I say, for the benefit of people who weren't involved previously. Can you hear me at the back? No questions at this point, but...
It was a quick question. You said the 100-foot setback on the north side. What about the east side?
That's not required. That's not a requirement of the PIP1 zone because it's not adjacent to residential. So there's a street between the two. But as we'll show, we're actually going beyond that. So I'll get back to that in a second. So these are the existing uses that are permitted in the PIP1 zone. So as I noted, it's a planned industrial zone, so there are some industrial uses, generally lighter industrial uses, so light industry, manufacturing, research and development, construction contractors' yards. So they're permitted uses, and together with office uses and some civic uses and commercial uses, and then there are various uses which are conditional in the PIP1 zone. So that's what could be developed in the property today. And obviously the current building, the existing building there is primarily office use, and we would anticipate that if there were any further development, it would probably be of a similar nature. So we are proposing for this PUD zone to eliminate all industrial uses, because we don't actually think this is an appropriate location for industrial uses. It's not consistent with the existing building, and so we wanted to narrow down the range of uses that could be allowed here to more office, civic uses, some limited commercial uses, because part of the reason for doing this rezone is to try and broaden the range of uses on the property to make it more viable. And then obviously the introduction of the residential, multifamily residential, single family detached and attached, and retirement home. So they're the uses we're proposing. As Dan mentioned, this is the master plan amendment that was approved by the city. So that shows in the areas identified in yellow, that's a site. It identifies the uses that we requested at the time. So that is area D on the left here is shown as 55 acres of open space. Area C is shown as residential. Area B is shown as a mix of either office, commercial, or institutional residential. And then area A, which is the existing building, is identified as commercial, institutional, or office. So no residential in that area. So that's the master plan that has been approved. One of the considerations of a zone change, one of the criteria, is consistency with the master plan. So that is one of the changes that we see, change in circumstances. As City Council did approve the master plan, we are now consistent with the master plan. So here is our concept plan. It looks a bit blander than this on our submittal. It's just in black and white, but we added some colour to make it easier to read. So as I noted, area A is the area outlined in red in purple. It's 44 acres. It has the existing building there, which is approximately 750,000 square feet. It includes the parking areas to the north and east of the building. So we're not proposing any new buildings in that area. That is really just going to preserve the existing building as it stands today, with associated parking. No residential is going to be permitted in that area. And in addition, we are expanding the uses beyond office to include some potential commercial institutional uses. So area B is the area at the corner of Flying W Ranch Road and 30th Street. It's the existing parking lot. Much of that existing parking lot is underutilised. It's really only the first couple of rows that get used. It's cracked, it's overgrown. If you've been on the property, you can see that from aerial photography as well. That area is proposed in our concept plan for a mix of use options. So multifamily residential is one of those, but also commercial, office and institutional uses per the use table that we indicated previously. In addition to that, through the negotiation process and through the discussion process with the neighbourhood last time around, we agreed to the orange area that basically runs along Flying W Ranch Road and then along 30th Street. That's 150 feet, and that zone would not allow anything higher than 2 stories as a residential use. And the maximum we committed to, also a maximum height of 3-story or 45 feet, whichever was the higher. So we're not going to go above 3-story anywhere on the property. In that zone, it would be 2-story and no more than 45 feet anywhere on the property.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, which zone was that, please?
Sorry, the area that's limited to 2-story is this orange area here, which is a 150-foot setback from the property line.
So anything built in that area is max 45 feet?
No, so anything built in this area is a maximum of 2-story. Anything built in the yellow area would be a maximum of 3-story.
How many feet is 2-story?
two-storey can be, let's say 35 feet. It can be between 30 and 35 feet. So a regular single-family home usually comes in around 30 feet.
So at Flying W and 30th, there's a potential for the berm plus another 35 feet, correct?
Yes, but the berm would stay where it is, but there is a setback from the edge of the property of 50 feet anyway, so the nearest building could not be nearer than 50 feet, and then it will be limited to two-storey. So I'll come on and show a concept that we prepared in a second. So area C, which is the area as you come into the main entrance just to the left, that is developed partially as a overflow parking area. Again, that's not being used. It's very overgrown, and that area is proposed just for residential. So it includes the overflow parking area plus a little sloped area behind that, but it stops short of going up into the ridge area. So the ridge area, which we identified previously, just the B and C together, the maximum density for those two areas together is 16 units per acre, as I previously mentioned. And there we note the 150-foot setback. And then area D, which is much bigger than the area that's currently zoned agriculture. Our plan is to preserve that as open space. We have had discussions with City Parks Department about taking that open space, and a TOPS application for funding for that was initiated in 2020. It hasn't moved further forward because of the failure of the previous project to get approval by City Council, but that's still on the cards there for that area to be retained as open space. So this was another thing that was requested when we had our I would say quite one-on-one small group discussions with neighbourhood representatives, that it was more clearly defined what uses were allowed in which area. So this effectively says area B, which is the current parking lot, pretty much any of the proposed uses. Area A, which is the existing building, no residential. Area C, just residential. And area D, open space. So this is one of the concepts. We did a couple of concepts. So this is B. This is the one we based our 150-foot setback on. So this just shows the potential of the site to be built out entirely for multifamily per the zoning. This is one of the options. There are a number of other uses that are also options. So this is an option that would be entirely multifamily residential. As indicated, we respecting that 150-foot zone with two-storey only. So the buildings that are shown in pink here would be two-storey only. And then the buildings shown in blue would be three-storey. Now you can see some buildings on the west side that are half pink and half blue, and that means it's like it's a step down, a walkout, kind of like a lot of the homes in Mountain Shadows have the walkout. One side's 2 stories, one side's 3 stories. So that's similar arrangement. And then you've got some areas which are shown in blue. They're stormwater detention ponds. They haven't been designed, but that's just conceptually where they would need to be located. So with those as well being located in the corners, the buildings are going to be even further set back by design, because the stormwater detention has to go at the lowest point of the site, so they have to be in those locations. So we did a few perspective renderings, or not really renderings, they were computer-generated visual analyses based on topography and our preliminary architecture. Because like I said, this is just a concept. We haven't developed anything in detail on this site yet, and really haven't looked at site grading, which is always critical. And so these are some visual concepts that were prepared. They're on the board over there as well if you want to get a closer look. But just looking at different viewpoints. So this is looking towards the corner of 30th and the entrance to the property. So that's that kind of west portion that is currently the overflow parking area. This one's looking more down 30th. So you visualising the property on the right-hand side as you driving towards the intersection of Garden of the Gods. And then this one is more from Flying W Ranch direction. So these are the different visual concepts we provided at the Planning Commission and City Council hearings. So that's just for some context of where we stand today. And really, that's all I have to present. This is the plan we are presenting. It's the same plan we finished with at the end of the process last time. And with that, we're happy to listen to your comments, questions. We'll answer what we can, but we're really here more to get feedback on questions and concerns. So happy to open it up. I will ask one thing though, that please respect the time for everybody. We don't have that long, we have to finish at 7:30. So please say your piece and we'll go on to the next person, and try not to repeat the same things. We have people taking notes. Brooks is over there, he's taking notes. If somebody's already made your comment, we've got it, we've got a note of it. So just for the interest of getting through, there's quite a few people here tonight, interest of getting through everybody's questions, let's keep it moving, so to speak. So this lady here.
You keep referring to we. Who is we?
Who is we? So the applicants. So the applicants are the landowners who are 2424 Garden of the Gods. The mother company is Vision Properties. And I am with NES. My name's Andrea Barlow. I'm principal of NES. We're a local land planning landscape architecture firm. And we are representing the applicants in this effort. So we is that cumulative we, myself, my client, and that's the we. Okay, no problem. Ma'am, and I am actually going to provide microphones, so because it's a big room, so everybody can hear.
Can you just point out on that last graphic where the streets are for all of the streets in the neighborhood and where they would come out, and if any of them come out directly onto 30th Street? So you may have to go back a slide.
The plan community.
Yes, thank you. So the one with wrong way. The one with the concept on, this one?
Yes.
So we're utilising the existing access points, and we're not proposing any new access points. So they will be utilising for the development the access point at 30th and Garden of the Gods. We have access as there's an internal road system through the development as it stands today. So we're proposing access points onto these internal roads, and then there are existing accesses out onto Flying W Ranch Road. And so it would be primarily this access onto Flying W Ranch Road, and then the existing access at 30th and Garden of the Gods. We did consider at one point, and I will say this, an access here, which is opposite the access that goes to the Loaf and Jug. But the grade difference there is too severe to be able to make that work, so we moved away from that. It was just making too big a grade difference. The gentleman stood up at the back.
And I'm going to hold on to the mic just so we limit the germs around here. So.
Is all of this material that you're presenting today available online?
It can be. So this presentation has not been provided to staff yet, but we can certainly provide it to Dan, and he can put it on the project file on a seller now. Yes. So if anybody has been onto the city's website recently, they have a new online submittal program called a seller, and that's where all the documents are to be found. So we will provide Dan with this presentation. There is nothing new in here, I would say, from the presentations that we made to City Council back in August last year. So this information is all already on the public record, but we will provide him with this PowerPoint presentation.
I would like to second that request. Please make sure it happens, because I've been looking for handouts. It would be much easier to have something here to look at than from a distance. So thank you for putting that online.
Absolutely no problem. We're happy to do that, and we'll get that to Dan tomorrow morning, and he'll have it up there. There's the gentleman here, and then there's a gentleman back there with an orange top on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, my name's Ron Mott. I live in the Peregrine subdivision, about 4.5 miles north of this. I had one question and then a couple of quick comments. My question is, the owners of the land, your people whom you represent, when did they actually buy this property?
I believe it was 2018. I believe it was 2018.
I thought you'd owned it longer than that. My question was, as far as my comments, many of us here, I see a lot of faces of people who have been in these meetings before. One of our primary concerns and why many of us in this room so vehemently opposed this development was from a public safety standpoint. Anybody who was here in 2012 during the Waldo Canyon fire saw firsthand the difficulty that the city encountered, certainly those of us who live here, in getting out and being evacuated when that fire came during a heretofore unseen public emergency. I know the city has done some reviews. They gave some cursory lip service to evacuation plans, but to our knowledge, there has been no substantive work on a major evacuation plan for this town. Where I live, up in Peregrine, a trip that normally takes, there are only 2 ways west to get out of here in an emergency. Pardon me, east. And that would be Garden of the Gods Road and Woodman. Even Rockrimmon feeds into Woodman. And a trip that normally takes about 5 to 6 minutes from my home to I-25 took over 2.5 hours to get out of there because of the clog.
During an emergency.
And this was, it was fortunate that as horrendous as that fire was and the tremendous property damage, particularly in Mountain Shadows, that was suffered, 2 lives were lost, but that it wasn't worse than it was. And I have not seen, and I'd be very interested in whoever can address this as far as a substantive major evacuation plan that the city and the fire department and everybody else has gone over, particularly in light of new development here. If you're putting, I know you've reduced your number down to 420 units. That's going to be easily double that in cars, so it's going to be another 800 cars that have to get out and move in case we have an emergency. There are a lot of other things. I don't want to take up too much time. There are a whole list of things that those of us who oppose this development put forth as far as public safety, number 1. Number 2, property values in Mountain Shadows, how these units would be built. I realize that you have a property and you need a return on investment, and we've got to come to some kind of agreement, but multifamily housing and putting that many more people in that part of town is just a really bad idea, and that's why it was resoundingly defeated last year, and I think most of the people here will feel the same way unless some other tweaks can be made. As I said, I know you own the property, it's your right to do something with it, but what you got planned, I don't think is going to be the right way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we do understand. And I think, sir, you said it very eloquently, and we do understand that that is the primary concern of the residents, and we appreciate you making that comment. The gentleman at the back in the orange had a question.
And I will just note, as Max is getting the mic here, so if you're not able to speak tonight, but you do have public comments, you want to submit those for consideration by staff for the project team. Many of you that did receive a notification either through the green card or the email that I sent out to everybody, send me those comments in an email, send me a letter. I do have business cards up here. Anybody that's present tonight will also be added to those listservs. So again, you'll see additional notifications on this project as it moves forward. So,
but will you actually read and consider those, or is the village just
I read every single application.
And consider. And consider.
Hi, good evening. My name's Thomas. I live in Mountain Shadows on Courtney Drive. And I'm a little hoarse from working all day, but a quick search of the Colorado Springs website states that Colorado Springs is dedicated to protecting the environment, preserving natural resources, and reducing our carbon footprint. How does this development mesh with those initiatives?
Well, I can go back to the plan that identifies the fact that we're proposing to preserve 55 acres of open space. which is not currently available to the city. It's private land, and we're proposing to offer that to the City Parks Department so that they can incorporate it into their open space system and trail system. They have plans for the extension of the Blodgett Trail and Chamberlain Trail through Flying W Ranch in the future, and that is a significant benefit to the city as seen by the Parks Department, and that is how we're addressing that concern. Gentleman next to him, and then this.
Yeah, so no one ever really addressed his previous question. What analysis has been done on traffic density in evacuation and just everyday use? What analysis has been done?
Okay, so I'll answer the traffic analysis first, and then the evacuation. I probably won't be able to give you an adequate answer, but I'll give you an answer. So we have to provide a traffic impact analysis as part of our submittal. We did that previously. We have updated that with new traffic counts, and we have taken into account all the previous comments. So it's a combination of what the city traffic department generally require for a traffic impact analysis to incorporate, plus taking into account neighbourhood comments from the previous submittal. So we've submitted a traffic impact analysis. The assumptions in there, the counts have been updated, but the assumptions in there are generally the same as previously, which were approved by the city. The city commissioned an independent review of that traffic study, which indicated that it was overly conservative. So the very conservative assumptions in that traffic analysis. So that analysis forms the basis of our submittal, and in that there are certain recommendations at certain trigger points through the years into the future, into 2040, 2045, about improvements that may need to be made. So that's all incorporated with our submittal, and that's online and that's available to review. Regarding the traffic, the fire evacuation, that is not the developer's responsibility, but to the city's. To your point, the city has since, and it was pretty much brought forward by the discussion that was had on this project previously. They have done additional research and brought forward an ordinance where they have implemented additional wildfire evacuation procedures within Chapter 8 of the zoning code. And they have also implemented and purchased Zone Haven, which is a wildfire evacuation software. And so that is all I can tell you on that point. The city have taken steps. They have, in doing that, they have taken a step to say that the responsibility for wildfire evacuation is on the city, and it's a citywide issue. It is not a criteria for assessing individual developments. So the gentleman in the yellow top there has had his hand up a while.
Hi there, my name is Glenn Carlson. I actually probably had a question more for Daniel. Daniel, do you know how Retool COS and Plan COS is going to affect this zoning? And I guess a secondary question would be, what would the allowables be after those zoning changes go into effect from Plan COS and the scope of this project? And then my second question, I guess, is geared around the apartments that are in progress right by the Loaf and Jug, another several hundred. How is that going to affect the density, and are we looking at that yet?
Yes, so with regards to the proposed PUD zone, that is a hard-based zone that this applicant is requesting. So it would be applied specifically to this property. Retool and the proposed zone districts that are included within that would not impact this. So this was standalone and continue to carry forward. Similarly with the Hillside Overlay Zone District. It would still be carried forward and applied to the property. Now in terms of the development standards, that is based on what they propose, and if it were to get approved, that would be what they have to adhere to moving forward with the development of the site. That's the list of uses, setbacks, building heights, things of that sort. Now with respect to adjacent developments, which I know, I think you mentioned the multifamily across the street. I am also the case planner on that project. So we do consider all proposed development. One of the metrics, because I know as was just previously mentioned, was the traffic side of things. They do have, as Andrea mentioned, a build-out scenario going into 2040, 2045, which accounts for additional residential units, which would account for that additional residential development if it was approved. But that is a separate project, separate approval process for that.
And just to add on there, Dan, it hasn't been approved yet.
Correct, correct.
This lady here and then the gentleman at the back.
Hi, this may pertain to Mr. Sexton. I'm concerned with changing this to a PUD, and maybe it works differently here, but where I lived before, went through a project like this in our neighborhood. They had it designated as a PUD. All the plans were supposedly in stone. Once the PUD designation came about, the developer changed everything. It did not have to go to city council anymore because it was a PUD. It could just go straight to the planning commission, who rubber stamped all the changes. That's my big concern.
I mean, so I can't speak to the other community in the instance that you experienced. I will say in Colorado Springs, when you establish, or when city council establishes for development the PUD as a zone district, like I said to the previous question, it does establish a list of uses. It establishes certain development standards, and the development moving forward is obligated to adhere to those. If they want to change, I'll just say like one of the height limitations was set at 45 feet. If they wanted to come in with their development plan and propose a maximum height of 50 or 60 feet hypothetically, they would actually have to go back through and change the zoning again to reestablish that dimensional standard. So they're obligated to follow through with it. There is one aspect I would like to though clarify, is that with this sequence of applications with a zone change and a concept plan, when they, if those were to be approved and they came in with a development plan that gives us much greater detail of site design and layout, those applications, unless specifically stated as part of the PUD, would likely be an administrative application, but would still go through a similar public notification process and engagement process.
But no city council.
But no city council, that is correct.
Exactly.
Quick question. Any city
there's-
council in here?
It's not a city council meeting, so there's no city council here, but the gentleman at the back has had his hand up for a while.
So is there, the city council has approved this, so is there a means of appealing this process? Appealing what's already been done, and so that we have more of a voice of what's going on in this neighborhood?
So just to clarify, City Council has not approved this. Actually quite the opposite. Last year City Council denied it on the second reading. They approved it on the first reading, denied it on the second reading. This is a new application. We will have to go through Planning Commission and City Council again. So City Council has not approved this. Just to clarify. Is that okay? Do you understand? Is that okay? Good. Dan can follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only aspect that I would include is, so say this runs through the process and is approved by City Council, the zone changing concept plan. The only manner of recourse to object to these applications that we're considering under this project would be to appeal it through district court. And again, I'm just speaking to these two applications that we're talking about today.
So, oh gosh, lots of people put their hand up there. Let's go with the lady here in the red, in the middle, and then we'll go to the back.
I have a simple question, and it kind of goes with what the gentleman in the back said. So what's phase two? Do you have a phase two in mind? We'd like to know what the phase two is before phase one gets approved.
So I think what you're saying there is the follow-up from what Dan was saying, that this is the zoning and the concept plan. The concept plan and the zoning just really establishes uses and general parameters. So it doesn't deal with the site layout. What we're showing with you, what we showed on that earlier slide, this one, is just a concept of what it could look like if it were all to be proposed to residential. There could be some different plans and proposals as long as it falls within the parameters of the uses, the setbacks, the height. That's what the zoning is establishing. So phase 2 is, I think we're fairly certain that we will come forward with some residential on this area. But I would say this area is still, it will probably be residential, but it could be some other uses. We've always kept that area a bit more open to be potentially some other mix of uses. So the truth of the matter is we don't really know what phase 2 is, other than I would say with some degree of confidence that this area, which is area C on the concept plan, probably will be our first development plan and will be residential multifamily. Let's go with the gentleman right next to you. Sorry, there's
My
lots
name's John McLean and I live in Mountain Shadows. This project's already been rejected by City Council the first time, and it's in the court system, as you've already mentioned.
Yes.
And the city attorney has backed City Council in the 106 appeal, which I have right here. And she says specifically that this project is not appropriate under the city's rezoning code for the following reasons. A, it's unsafe due to high traffic volumes. B, it violates the hillside overlay criteria. C, the bighorn sheep are on the open space. What is the project team going to do to alleviate this so that you can be successful?
So the city attorney is required to support City Council's decision, but the response to the first part of that, which is the safety evacuation, which was the primary reason for City Council denying the project first time around, it was the primary reason. Other issues were raised but didn't carry the majority of the City Council, including the bighorn sheep. There was only one City Council member who referenced that in their decision. And so since that decision was made, we believe there has been a material change of circumstances with the introduction of the new public safety emergency evacuation ordinance. Plus we now have a master plan that's approved to support, that supports the rezoning. The lady right at the back, at the very back.
My name is Jenny Portier and I live on Granby Circle. I am a long time, I've been here since 2001. I lived through the wall of fire the morning of. I lost my father at 8:30. As we started to evacuate, I was worried of how we were going to get his body out of our home. We worried what was going to come. Is he going to be cremated by fault? Second thing is I lived through my brother who worked at the King Soopers in the shooting. I also now currently work on the complete opposite side of the city. I waited 35 minutes just last week because Garden of the Gods had one lane, 30th is shut down. I just want to know the safety protocol. Before phase 1 and phase 2, I want to know how am I going to get out? Because I had my father waiting. So I don't quote build, but tell me the safety of all of us first. Especially when the study was done by COVID. Sorry.
So just to clarify, we have updated the study. So the study is based on current circumstances. The previous study, granted, was undertaken during COVID. We didn't have much choice about that. It was updated subsequently, but we have done a completely new study. It is not based on anything that happened during COVID.
With the new add-ons, with the new build-ons, already happened.
I can't hear you.
Have you already done it with the new build-ons of Centennial, those apartments and those townhouses? We're adding more up on Garden of the God, or sorry, Fillmore, thank you. And we just keep adding. I don't care about the building. Tell me my safety. And you can say you did that, but show us then.
So we have done the traffic analysis based on typical current conditions. So we don't take into account road closures, temporary road closures on certain streets, and we don't take into account the diversions that are in place during that time. We look into the future and incorporate all planned development in that scenario with growth factors, and so that is all taken into account in the traffic study. That is reviewed by the city traffic engineers, and ultimately it is Planning Commission and then ultimately City Council's decision as to whether those studies are adequate and adequately address the concerns. We feel they've been addressed to the requirements of the code as it stands today. Yes, the lady.
I would just like to mention, if we can keep the side comments to a minimum, it's difficult sometimes to hear the speaker, and I want to make sure that everyone can hear her while she's addressing the comments.
My name is Genevieve Gustafson, and I was affected by the Waldo Canyon fire. And I've owned that home for almost 30 years in this community. And one of the things that I keep hearing is absolutely the traffic. We've been adding new buildings, new apartment buildings. There's been no new parks added. This building, you said, will have open space, but that is not a new park. And there isn't anywhere to put a new park that would be accessible to everybody. Trails and so forth, I love those, but it's not Chipeta Park where everybody is congregating right now, and we are well below what the standard quality of living, which is actually 10 acres per 1,000 people, not 2.5, which is what the Tops has in it today with the new retooled plan. But the thing is this is a WUI, and we live near a canyon, and I have parents out in Black Forest, 2 miles away from the fire, and the city did not protect our houses, and it's only going to be worse with additional multifamily homes in an area that does not, it's just not compatible. It's common sense. It's a WUI. We have bear, we have bighorn sheep, we have deer, we have bobcats, we have mountain lions where we live. We need to protect that WUI from further growth into the future, and this building is not compatible with that. Most of the homes in this area are not even really technically compatible with that, but they're there. And we can't turn it around. So to me, when you're saying, well, it's the city's responsibility, your client bought this property knowing what the zone was. Yes. Just like I purchased my home and I knew what that zoning was. It's a request to make some significant changes that would affect all of us and our quality of life, and additionally put additional risk and traffic in an area that is a huge risk.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm not going to repeat my comments. I'm not going to continue to repeat the same response to the wildfire evacuation issue. So, I mean, you can make your comments if you wish to, but I'm not going to respond to that more than I have already. I will respond to the parks comment. We work with the City Parks Department. They make their recommendations of what we need to provide for parks. They have asked for fees in lieu of parkland dedication in view of the proximity to the Chipeta Park. And we will be providing amenities on this site for the residents of this development. So that's the only thing I wanted to comment there. This lady here has been very patient.
Hi, I just want to say that that they have answered the question on the traffic study. They have resubmitted it. I would like to know when it was done, though, when it was reaccomplished to submit this time.
We submitted on November 15th, and it was finalised just before we submitted. So the counts are probably taken in October.
Okay. So they've answered the question, but keep in mind that they only have to look at the traffic for their one project. They're only concerned about their one project.
Actually, we analysed the traffic for our project in the context of all the planned developments in the area and looking into the growth of the area to 2040, 2045. So we don't look in isolation at our project.
Well, I don't think that anybody is doing a comprehensive look. I think that our comments need to be directed at the city traffic engineer, because I do not feel like they should let the developers do what they do and build, and then come in later with the growth study in 2050 or 2040 and go, oh yeah, by the way, this doesn't support it. Now we need to tax you, we need to build more roads, we need to build more infrastructure, we need more fire, we need more police, yada, yada, yada. That is how this happens. So the city is not taking a comprehensive look at all of the apartments that have gone up on Centennial. The traffic study does not include all of the choke points. It should include all the way to Fontanero, to Mesa, to Fillmore, to Centennial, and anything that goes from east to west. Every single one of those intersections should be included, and it's not. They're only looking at Garden of the Gods and 30th. So there is no comprehensive study of the growth, all of the streets, and all of the choke points that have been submitted for this project to be reviewed.
Two questions for you. I know we've all requested if you all would consider building single-family residences to make it compatible with the rest of the subdivision around, which is what we've requested.
With the proposed zoning.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say I share all the concerns and full agreement with my fellow residents on the west side. Great, fantastic community and support. I guess my question would be a little different here. Has consideration been given to the impact of these developments, not just this one, but others surrounding our community, to public education? Like, how in the world, or has consideration or funding or planning been considered for Chipeta Elementary and surrounding as well, with all these units coming in? That's a great concern, because, you know, accommodating the staff, the teachers, et cetera, et cetera.
So with every land use application that requires or proposes the additional residential units, we do solicit comment from the affected school district. This project application is still under review. I would venture to guess, based on previous application, the response will be fairly similar from the district, which at that time was fees in lieu of land dedication.
So that basically means that they don't feel there's a need for any additional land for schools. And based on discussions we've had with District 11 and other commentary that was received during the previous project, District 11 does not perceive it has an issue with capacity at schools, and in fact welcomes the addition of new residents in the area to help support their schools.
Correct.
There's a gentleman, lady at the back first. Yeah. The lady at the back, and there's a gentleman down here.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Hi, my name is Danette Taylor. I'm a Colorado Springs native. I've lived in Mountain Shadows for 20 years. I also was very greatly impacted by the Waldo Canyon fire. I've attended a number of these meetings, some of the early meetings, and I've got to express major disagreement with what you're planning, and some of the comments about making assumptions and having a variety of options that are very ill-defined, and the lack of comprehensive evaluation through the city. There are a lot of stovepipes that I heard in the meetings with Widener and the other places. Water, utilities, schools. It's not our responsibility. Each one of those areas has to do this evaluation. There's a very great lack of an umbrella evaluation of cumulative impacts. We've got Flying W Ranch has expanded greatly with huge rodeo crowds and other things happening. The traffic, there are a lot of things happening at one time, and I'm very not comfortable with our health and safety, which are priceless, Garden of the Gods Park, which is our greatest city resource, and what you're doing here. And after going to the meetings with Widener Apartments, it was very much like, we're going to get to do what we want to do. We've got the big bucks, and the city is falling in line behind that. And I almost heard from you an assumption or an expectation this is going to get rolled through. I am not in agreement with that, And how many people here are in disagreement with what these folks are proposing? It's not safe, and it's not healthy, and it's not for our future.
Appreciate your comments, ma'am. This gentleman here, because he's right next to you, and then the gentleman over here.
Will parking be adequate to contain all of the cars from both residential and commercial units and keep parking out of adjacent areas?
That's a good question, sir. So there's currently a surplus parking of about 2,000 parking spaces at this development per the city code requirements. And majority of the parking here is not being used because it hasn't been used for quite a while, but obviously with the changes in working habits with COVID, there's even less use. And then obviously with our proposed development, whatever the use is, we will have to meet city code requirements. So yes, there is, we will have to meet city code requirements. We'll have to design the plan to ensure that the parking that's been taken away from development is compensated by the parking that's provided to support the new development. So the answer to your question is yes, it will have to be. The area that we're proposing for Area C is currently an unused overflow parking area. That was never really part of the original parking plan. It was developed for parking in the 90s, and then it's just been disused and it's overgrown. And the parking area at the front of the building along 30th is largely unused right now as well. So it's not used or needed for the current building or its future uses, even when it's at 100% occupancy, which it's not now. Even at 100% occupancy, it has an excess of about 2,000 parking spaces. So with that, we would be making sure that any development meets the city standards, whether it's multifamily, commercial, or whatever. So thank you for your question, but yes, staff will hold us responsible for providing adequate parking and making sure that the existing building is whole in that regard.
Okay. My name is Bowen Gillings, and I'm a Mountain Shadows resident. And that segues perfectly into my question, which is, those unused parking lots, has the developer considered actually contributing something the community actually needs, which is overflow parking for Garden of the Gods? You could easily put in paid metered parking, a shuttle service to the park, which would actually be a benefit to the community instead of additional residential housing. I know the return on investment would not be as high, but you'd be contributing something currently that's unused that we actually need. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say we haven't considered that, so I will let my client consider that, and we'll get back to you on that one. But as you say, it doesn't provide probably the return of investment that they need to make this project and this site a viable investment. I'm trying to pick people who haven't said anything yet. The gentleman at the back. Gentleman at the back there.
I just have a couple of questions. The first one being, can you share with this group what the benefit is to our neighborhood and our part of town of this proposed action?
So we look at the benefits for the city as a whole, and the city as a whole desperately needs housing. And this site, oh yes it does, there is a huge need for housing. And there is a need for housing in this location as much as there is for anywhere else. And there is a need for more variety and mix of housing. So whether there is a need specifically for your neighborhood, probably not, but there is a citywide need and a citywide importance for this type of development.
Unfortunately, you did not answer my question, so thank you for that. Next question is for you. In the planning department, when's the last time your organization turned down a developer on something like this?
So there we go, sorry. So in terms of land use applications, I honestly couldn't answer that question in the sense of what we have denied. I will honestly say that the projects that don't comply with city code, you never hear about. They never come into consideration. They're never presented to Planning Commission, to City Council. So we take our jobs very seriously in the sense that if a project does not comply with code, it does not align with the city's guiding documents, we work very hard with that applicant to modify it, or it just doesn't happen.
But you don't represent the people that live in those given neighborhoods and what their desires are for the development.
We do, sir.
And why is this still being discussed?
Sir, we'll just make one question.
So I will add to that. Per the code, we are entitled to make the application, and the city has an obligation to accept it. They can deny it, but we have the right to make the application, and they have an obligation to accept it and review it. It's as simple as that. This gentleman here in yellow.
Okay, thank you. Just for everyone in here, there are commissions and boards that are incredibly valuable surrounding zoning and planning and land use that I encourage everybody to volunteer for and get involved with. And then you can drive a lot of the decision making behind some of these processes. The second piece that I was going to put is, is, being a native here, there's intangibles here that I love about Colorado Springs. One of those is when I come up Garden of the Gods and the peak pops out and the garden pops out and the sheep are on the side of the hill. There is no price on that. And so that canyon back there that you say does not have sheep, or that hillside for that matter, has lots of them, and they come right through our backyard, which is right there.
I'm not saying the hillside doesn't have sheep. I'm not saying that there's no sheep there occasionally. Yes, they do. But we are preserving that hillside. We are not building on the hillside. I just want to emphasize that the 55 acres of open space retains the hillside.
Correct, you are. I guess my question, Andrea, is regarding that TOPS working application. What's the hiccup on that? Why have they not reviewed it? What are they waiting for?
Because it is provisional on the this zoning being approved.
Not really a gift.
No, so it's not a gift, so it was never a gift. It was the TOPS, an application to TOPS for funding to purchase the property. And the purchase of the property would equate approximately to the park fees that we would have to pay. So it was never intended as a gift, and there is no incentive for the developer to do that if this zoning doesn't go through. So it would just remain as open space, but just in private ownership with no public benefit. So this gentleman here.
And that segues into my question. If the Area D is going to be set aside for open space, what is the point in including that in the unified zone?
Because currently that area is in two different zones. It's partially zoned agriculture and partially zoned PIP1. And just as a matter of good planning, it's better to have an entire property in one zone. And that's really the purpose of a PUD zone. This lady. The lady at the front first and then the lady.
I have a question for Dave. How does the city determine the water usage for these new projects? Do they even look at it?
So with every land use application, we do submit the proposed project to Colorado Springs Utility. I can't speak specifically to their planning and policies and how they make decisions, but that is one of our review criteria is to make sure that there's adequate availability and service for CSUs for utilities.
My question is for Daniel. I would like to know how many thousands of apartments, multifamily units are currently under construction in the city, and what is our average monthly influx into Colorado Springs to demand this? The growth is everywhere. They're being built everywhere, so I want to know how many units are being built currently and how many people are moving into our city every month to justify this.
And honestly, I can't answer those two. But
I can answer the second question. There's about 20,000 people who move in on average every year to Colorado Springs, and it's been about exactly the same for about the last 20 years. So it's about 20,000 people on average every year for 20 years. So That's also why, as a percentage, actually less people are moving in, because it's the same amount, it got bigger. Just as a statistical. I'm not here to actually, I just do that one.
But I'm happy to get the answer to you about the total number of units that are under construction.
Thank you. So I wanted to know, goes back 2 questions. The city council is also the board of the utilities. So how does that work when they make these decisions?
They are the board and the city council. I mean, I can't say much more than that. That's not a decision I make, that they're the CSU board. They make that decision for themselves. So they are the board, you are correct, of the Colorado Springs Utilities and the city council. So they are very informed on what the capacity, water capacity availability for the city is.
Okay, one more question. What kind of contributions is the city council getting from the developer for this project?
None. The landowner is not making any contributions to the city council. I actually don't really understand the question, because I don't understand the question. A political contribution? Or like a campaign contribution, or? None. The developer's not making any. Multiple developers around town do, but local developers, this developer is not a local developer, as you all know, and have not made any contributions.
Your company has, Wayne will have you.
Hey guys, if we can leave the comments until we get the microphone, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question about the traffic analysis. It was never done during the fire, because if it had been done during the fire, they would know that those roads out there have never been improved in the last 10 years, and they weren't able to accommodate the people that were here then.
Thank you, ma'am, but we can't do a traffic analysis retroactively. We can't do it from 2012. This lady here, and then the gentleman in the red has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I don't know anything about zoning. I just want everyone to consider this one fact. On a normal day, with no construction happening on Garden of the Gods Road, that traffic backs up from the interstate past Centennial, 3 and 4 lanes. Imagine that in an emergency, trying to get people out of there. I was at the intersection of Centennial and Rock Rimmon, or Vindicator, the day of the fire, and it looked like Armageddon.
Thank you, ma'am. The gentleman at the back there in the red, and then I saw a hand up over here, the lady at the east side there, and the lady next to her as well, and then we'll come over here.
The question for Daniel. If the developer violates the hillside ordinance, how is that enforced?
So it depends on how we're made aware of the situation. So in the sense of any of you presenting a complaint to our neighborhood services division, we have code enforcement officers that do specialize in land use application and review and consideration of those enforcement actions. They then work closely with the case planner, if they're still within our office that was assigned to that project, to determine whether there truly is an enforcement, or what are the applicable or appropriate mitigation or remedies to resolve it.
So I can start by contacting you if we notice something?
You can either, if there's a code enforcement, it could come to me, or it could go through neighborhood services and their call line.
It's a good reminder, use our Go COS app to report anything to the city, and that's the type of thing that we do.
But just to clarify on that, in terms of violating the hillside ordinance, when we get to the point of submitting a development plan, we have to make sure that development plan accords with all the hillside requirements, and the city staff review that, and their hillside planner reviews that. So we won't get our plans approved for development if they don't meet the requirements of the hillside overlay. So, I mean, if you're talking about future violations, then I mean, yes, that would be the approach. But in terms of plan development that would be proposed, we would have to meet the hillside overlay requirements.
Okay, this is for Daniel as well. With this corridor being the entryway to the gem of our city, Garden of the Gods, if the development is approved, what oversight or influence does the city have in terms of the exterior of the apartment buildings, the finishing? I notice in those, on the boards, they look like they really blend into the hillside, but we've all seen examples of apartment buildings that look like they landed from different planets. And so I'd just like to know, does the city have any influence in the quality of the build and how that blends into the hillside and the region?
So under current code, no. So our current code does not give staff, in most cases throughout the city, design review authority to dictate facade materials. There are some additional development standards or considerations that if the rewrite of the city zoning code comes into fruition, that will give staff additional tools to work with developers. But as it exists today, no, we do not have that ability. And with these applications, we wouldn't know what that material is going to be. So again, as Andrea mentioned, this is a representation on what the developer or their builder that they're working with has used or considered for products. It's not a requirement for a concept plan.
And I would just add to that saying, despite the location of the meeting tonight, it's not our intent to develop something that looks like it comes from outer space. We will be looking at doing something that's sympathetic to the location. And also, the owners have an existing asset, the existing building, which they want to make sure that any future development on this site is complementary to, both in terms of design, how it's managed and use and so on. So they are looking at this entire site as a long-term asset. So they are not going to be building something that's going to impact negatively the ability to lease their existing space.
I just have a comment. You saying that we need more housing in Colorado Springs. No, we need more affordable housing in Colorado Springs. And this project is not going to address that problem. So I think that's a bogus comment on your part.
So we need all types of housing in Colorado Springs. Yes, affordable housing is a key component of that need. This is not proposed to be subsidized affordable housing. It will be market rate. But the more choice and variety you have in the types of apartments, the types of single-family residential attached, all along the spectrum of the whole price range, it gives people more choice. People can move up. It releases other housing at the lower end of the market. So it's a full spectrum of housing that is part of the housing need.
Yeah, but we already have that.
Well, actually, that is part of the problem. We don't have that. There's a big gap between in the middle income area. That is a very big gap. That is why we have the housing crisis that we have. This gentleman here hasn't asked a question yet.
John Armstrong. I've lived in Mountain Shadows since about '87. Was in our house when the fire happened. Our house was destroyed. We rebuilt on the same lot. And I was not at home at the time because I work in Yellowstone in the summertime. My question is, twice I heard the word institutional use for both the existing building and for what you plan to build, maybe. What type of institutional use are you looking at?
So the types of institutional uses that spring to mind, civic institutional uses, would be like schools, colleges, possibly churches, those sorts of uses. That's what we would categorize as an institutional civic use.
Can we see if anyone hasn't asked a question first?
Is there anybody who wants to ask a question who hasn't already asked a question?
I want Dan to reply to mine, that's it.
Okay, so
I just want Dan to reply to mine because I never got a reply.
And yours was about the city taking a comprehensive look at things, okay? And then we'll
And whether the traffic study is going to be redone to be inclusive of all the choke points, not just Garden of the Gods and 30th.
So the traffic study is still under review. These applications are still in their initial review phase, so we have not received comments from the city's traffic engineering department. They will dictate whether the traffic control manual requires additional analysis beyond the scope that has already been reviewed in the study. So that's the answer to that one. Now, in terms of the big picture analysis, each kind of department, subject matter specialist group does do comprehensive analysis of what they provide or what they oversee within the city. Our department has the Plan COS as the guiding comprehensive plan for the city. Public Works, the Engineering Development Review Division, has Connect COS, which is currently is out for public comment and will be up for consideration by City Council after the first of the year, I would imagine. So each department, each division has their own kind of guiding document that they rely on for their review in addition to code requirements.
But none of it is going to be done or considered as a whole prior to the approval of this project. You're just talking about ongoing kinds of things, but nothing that's going to.
So the city already does have an intermodal transportation plan. Connect COS is an update of that plan. So they're looking at that next kind of 40-year horizon for what types of transportation systems and improvements need to be considered within the city.
And I would just add that there are specific standards that the city has for a traffic impact study and how far out you go in terms of analysing intersections based on the level of impact that the development traffic would have on those intersections. So that's set out in the code. And to require this development to go beyond that, whereas other developments that are currently being processed in the immediate area or have recently been approved didn't have to take those extra steps, I think would be unreasonable. We have done what the city code requires this traffic. Actually, we've gone beyond because we've done what city traffic engineering manual requires us to do. Plus, we've taken additional steps to address the neighbour concerns that were raised last time.
So are there different standards because it's a WUI then?
No, so for example, we've used the same standards for this study, although gone beyond for the neighbours, as for example the traffic study for the Widener apartments or the traffic studies for the projects upon Fillmore and Centennial, which are all in the WUI. So there is no requirement for this particular project to go beyond those parameters.
I do still have a question, but what's a WUI?
Okay, so thank you, ma'am, because I know you told me when you first got here that you've just moved into the area on September the 1st. So the WUI is the Wildland Urban Interface. So it's an area that's designated by the city for specific measures regarding wildland and wildland fires and mitigation. And it relates mainly to preventative measures, so things that you could do on your own lot or how you can construct materials and so on, how to take preventative action to help mitigate fires.
Okay, and my question was...
I think you wanted to add something.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add that it does include additional development standards. So she mentioned anecdotally building material requirements and things of that sort, but it does also include additional considerations when we're looking at that kind of next phase of land use application that would come before us in the terms of what are the combustible materials, what are those existing vegetation, what can be disturbed, what needs to be cleared out. The fire department has trained staff that look at those specific projects, and they do carry a whole list of additional stipulations on those developments.
Yeah, there's a long list of additional stipulations, and we have to include that in our development plan when we are proposing a development in the WUI.
And the question I wanted to ask is, I'm a new resident down here. I've just bought a house and moved down here in September. And I'm wondering, have there been any, or will there be any financial incentives to the property owner and developer to support development of this property, like lower taxes or lower fees?
No, the only way that is achieved in the city is through an urban renewal area, and this is not within an urban renewal area. So there's no specific tax incentives for this developer.
Oh, okay. Mark Flicker, I live in Mount Shadows as well, impacted by the fire as well. I'm not going to address any of those questions. I think we've all talked those pretty well. I'm just kind of curious, has the city done any other assessments on kind of basic pattern of life and what the impacts are going to be of another couple thousand residents coming into a small area? Are we going to have longer lines at Safeway or King Soopers? The gas station is going to be crowded. Are they going to increase police and fire and all those other first responder resources that are already stretched pretty thin?
Yeah, I can't, I mean, we don't look at the private sector market conditions. I mean, you mentioned longer lines at grocery stores and things of that sort. Those decisions are made by the private sector of where to locate their stores, their locations. With respect to police and fire, both the administration and city council are constantly evaluating that. I know they both have identified in recent budget decisions or discussions that there is a deficiency, and they're looking at ways to provide funding to increase those numbers. I will also note in that vein, City Council recently adopted citywide impact fees, which for all land use applications that are submitted after the first of the year, there's a metric to evaluate this, but they will be obligated to provide additional fees that will go directly into supporting the staffing and providing of facilities for police and fire.
But you guys might not look at the impact, you know, on the commercial side, but it affects all of us. So it needs to be taken into consideration. If commercial infrastructure is already stretched here and we add another couple thousand people into the area, the commercial industry doesn't respond fast enough to put more Safeways in or King Soopers or whatever it might be.
So it was a further commentary on the need to consider the impact on commercial infrastructure. This lady here, then the lady behind hasn't asked anything yet.
I just wanted to clarify, I asked about the number of people moving in. So I pulled it up, and from News Channel KRDO, number of people moving to Colorado drops. According to the census, 27,000 people moved to Colorado, not Colorado Springs, Colorado in 2020. Yep. A year later, it dropped to 14,700. The state demographer has stated it makes sense, growth is slowing down in Colorado. So, again, I think we have too many apartments. I don't think we know. You can't say there's 20,000 people moving to Colorado Springs unless you're stating that what the Census Bureau is putting out is false.
I'll just say that was not them, that was me. Max, I work for City Communications. Those numbers were on average from the state demographer's website. I was working on some graphics because I get that question a lot about how many people moved in here.
I agree, but so topography isn't necessarily an indicator of whether the hillside overlay is applied to the given property. There is an ordinance that was adopted by the city council in early 2000s that applied hillside overlay based on certain characteristics. But not all, just uniformly, all properties west of I-25 are covered by hillside. There's a patchwork. The vast majority of properties running up and down Garden of the Gods, Centennial area, Kissing Camels, all of those are outside of hillside overlay.
And then just briefly to your question about the single-family residential, we're not excluding it. It is included in the zoning. It is not something that's been considered to date. We are looking at multifamily, certainly on that one parcel I indicated, and there really aren't any specific plans for the remainder at this moment. But single-family residential is an allowed use with this proposed zoning. Obviously, the current zoning is not allowed, but it would be with the proposed zoning.
Bought houses with certain zoning. I can't change my zoning, but you apparently have the right to request a change in your zoning, and that affects all of us. The city has their rules, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to have that study, and as long as the developer follows those rules, then that affects all of us, but who is looking out for us? And I don't really see anybody.
So your first question of whether you have, excuse me, so ma'am, your first question of whether you have the right to be able to request a rezone of your property, you do. Land zoning is not a static status for a property. Yes, it informs the decisions and recommendations that we make as of staff on evaluating projects as they move forward with development, but any property owner within this room or within the community has the legal right under city code to request to rezone your property.
So I could go from R1 to R2 by making a formal request.
You can make a formal request. I will say, I will just listen to me for a second here, everybody. So I will say, just as this project is being asked to do, is any request we compare to what the code says. So if you wanted to go from a single family, R1 6000, R9000 residential zone, I know to many of those might seem just like gibberish, but those are single family residential zone districts. If you wanted to go to a more intensive residential zone district, you have the right to request that, but we do evaluate that based on what city code requires for that district.
And who made the change? I don't know, remember the change in the master plan. I don't know what that means. And I know it affects this request, but I don't understand what changes were made in the master plan so these requests could be made again.
So concurrent with the project team's applications that were considered over a year ago, at that time there was a major master plan amendment to allow for residential uses to be considered on the property in question, in addition to a zone change and concept plan. When City Council heard those applications, a master plan amendment only requires one meeting and one decision. So when council had their first reading on the overall project, which was the 3 applications as a bundle, they approved the master plan. So the master plan has effectively been changed to allow for residential uses on this property.
And so that cannot be changed. I mean, that was
The only way that can be changed is if the property owner or somebody that buys the property requests to change it.
And is there anybody, it seems like nobody has an overview. Everybody has, I have this job for doing road work and this job for fire safety, but nobody seems to have an overview of this whole project and how it affects everything.
So to be honest, ma'am, I would honestly say, so the question that was asked was, who does an overall review of the project, of any application that would come before the city decision makers? And to be honest with you, that is our department. We are tasked with reviewing all land use applications with respect to the review criteria, which include adequacy of consideration of road infrastructure, the city's stormwater requirements, the utility infrastructure. We do rely on those other departments as subject matter specialists to allow us to make an informed decision or informed recommendation to Planning Commission or City Council. So really your answer or to your question is that is the city's Planning and Community Development Department.
My name is Ken Rose. I've lived in Colorado Springs since 1950. Lived in Mountain Shadows since '85. Just wondering, once this is approved, is there a maximum limit to the number of units that can be built on this property?
So I would say if this is approved, I don't want to presume that it will be approved. It was not approved previously, but we hope it will be, as you hope it won't be. But as stated in the presentation, the maximum number of units that will be allowed with this zoning is 420 units. That is the maximum, absolutely.
So, Tom Malin again, I live in Courtney Drive, Mountain Shadows. This kind of ties back to my first question. And so if approved, how do you foresee this development being heating and cooled? Because the governor of Colorado stated, we are fighting for clean air and taking action to achieve 100% renewable energy in Colorado by 2040. how is this project or development going to meet that initiative?
We haven't even considered that yet because we're not at the development plan stage, but we will be working with Colorado Springs Utilities to get gas and electric service, but how that will be implemented, I don't know at this point. I can't answer that question. We're not at that level of detail.
So I have a question that ties back to previous meetings. So the zoning has been approved and changed for this property?
No, the master plan has, the zoning has not.
Okay, the master plan. If the property owner is not able to build this project as you have it proposed, what do they propose to do with this land? I remember an answer from previously. I want to hear your answer now.
Well, I'm not the property owner, so I'd have to defer to Joe on that one. I mean,
so
do you want the microphone?
Can I? Yeah. What was this?
So obviously, with the resubmission, our hope is that the zone change goes through and we are allowed to proceed with the concept plan as shown. If the zoning is denied, it brings us back to starting over and determining what other uses could be achieved on the land. Ultimately, the building itself was originally built for, as many of you know, for MCI as a call center. Industrial. So, but it was high density office, given the amount of parking. With the pandemic and the changes in workforce behavior, the density of the parking and the way the building is, there's just a whole lot of excess land that's not being utilized for the project. And so we have to figure out, we would have to start over and figure out how we would redo the property, but it wouldn't continue to sit to be vacant, as we need to try to invest in the property, to upgrade it, and have it become a thriving area within itself.
And I would just add to that in terms of, obviously, the current zoning is PIP1, so if this zoning were not approved, it would have to be within that range of uses that are allowed in the PIP1. And as we actually analysed the potential build out for other uses last time, and we assumed it would be more of the same, more similar office type development. So I think that's the most likely, but it could be some other PIP1 use.
Dave, if this is denied, can they reapply again in 12 months?
Yes. The question was, if this is denied, can we reapply again in 12 months? Yes, per the code we can.
So, for the developer, last year y'all had talked about possible uses of maybe retail or restaurants, maybe recreation is like a rec center with a pool, kind of like Cottonwood Creek Park, would be nice to go in there, something that would benefit the whole community. Another idea I had is, I don't know what the city offices are. I know you guys are having problems renting out your space, your office space. Has the city considered maybe moving into this space to help them increase their, it's Class A office space, one of the best office space in the city. Maybe the city could, move some offices in there.
Yeah, so retail and other office would be something we would consider if we had to adjust and our request was denied again.
That would I'll just clarify that we are requesting those uses with this zoning. They're not allowed under the current zone, so they are uses that we would be considering in the context of this current zone. Retail, commercial are not allowed under the PIP1 zone. So we're actually asking for those uses with this PUD to provide some of that flexibility.
I'll let that answer later.
In terms of the city's consideration of using the property, that's not currently on the table. You know, city administration continually evaluates how best to provide city services. But right now, that's not something that is currently being considered as part of this project. But if I remember correctly, can you flip to the list of uses? It still does support the ability to provide office space. So yes, in that sense, if the city had the need and wanted to enter into a private contract with the property owner to use or rent office space, they certainly could.
The question I have, you stated earlier that you were not looking at any additional entrance and exit access to your property. So here's the scenario. It's all residential. It's all multifamily. It's the middle of the night. You need to get out now. Have you done a study that shows that using those current entrance and exits, those people could get out? I know we have to deal with the rest of the neighborhood, but you just worry about your property. I understand that. Don't you think you need to really look at that?
We have looked at the internal access points to the external roads, and we have a couple of we have the access onto 30th Street, and then a couple of accesses onto Flying W Ranch Road from the overall development. Obviously, if it's the middle of the night and it's residential, there's going to be nobody in the office buildings. So, well, very few, probably some night workers. I'm not going to say nobody. Yeah, I mean, for a development of that side, we're required to have 2 points of access out of the property onto the surrounding road network, and we have 3.
But they won't be able to get out because it's non-stop traffic.
In the middle of the night? His question was the middle of the night.
Yeah, but I'm saying...
He did not mention a fire
I
scenario.
didn't want to bring that up. I just said you needed to get out. Okay? Because that's what they told me and my family when we were expected to leave, and the sheriff came up the street, and I said, how much time do we have? And he just yelled at me, now. And we booked as fast as we could, and we got caught in all that traffic because the city had not shut down the roads to make them all one way out. They still had people coming in to watch the fire. So I'm just simply saying that if you build there, this is what you're going to have to run against.
So, sir, I appreciate the comment. I would just maybe to clarify a couple points based on it. It's not going to be beneficial for any of us to talk about the hypotheticals or, to be honest, the realities of what occurred with the Waldo Canyon fire. But with land use applications, regardless of whether it's this project, the proposed multifamily across the street, or other land use applications that might come before our department, is that there is not a requirement for an emergency evacuation plan to be considered. There are factors that other disciplines look at in their evaluation, but there is not a requirement in city code.
Why?
We have a question over here.
Joe Parbanek from Mountain Shadows. This seems like you're piecing these together. What are you going to do when Wagner wants to build his apartments across the street for traffic? And there's also a consideration, I guess, that Flying W Ranch wants to put in a rodeo back there. 7,000 people in a residential zone. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, what do you...
So in terms of the Widener project, it hasn't been approved. It is still under review, and both projects do have build-out scenarios in terms of their traffic for the broader area that consider additional volume and vehicle trips being considered. With regards to Flying W Ranch, there is no current applications before us. We have heard the exact same conversation and information that you all have kind of presented today of a bigger picture desire to expand their operation, but no applications have come before us for us to evaluate.
One more question. Okay, you mentioned that the city utilities runs the water. Okay, there is no water. And you guys keep building these apartments, which you refer to as basically multi-family homes. They're apartments, call them what they are, apartments. Where's the water going to come from? The only thing the city does is say basically more restrictions on your water usage. So before you guys keep building these apartments, you need to address the water issue.
So I will just iterate that the city is not proposing to build these projects. But with every land use application, we do solicit input from Colorado Springs Utilities. So they are the keepers of their services and their providers. But they do evaluate whether there is adequate services in the area to support a given project.
So, this gentleman here, and then the lady right at the back next.
Bill. Bill Wysong.
Bill, are you asking us a question?
Yes.
Okay. We're here.
A couple of things. We really have two issues. We've got the development, and then we've got the city, which Dan is our representative here today, how they interpret certain comments. Both Travis Easton and Todd Frisbee have both stated on the record many, many times they are not evacuation experts. And they say, and in the traffic study, the intersections that they look at do not go past the development. So this city commissioned a study in 2010 for evacuation, hid it from everyone in the city because it told them what they didn't want to know, which is what we already experienced 2 years later, which is the horrendous traffic getting out due to the fire. With both Todd and Travis saying they're not evacuation experts, the city chose to ignore the 3 experts that were brought in to explain what the city was facing. So I'm just concerned, Daniel, that you're saying to go a broader area when in fact the traffic study doesn't go in a broader area. And that is what they have told us. So this is, unless something has changed, but we haven't seen the new traffic study. And so the key for that traffic study is, yeah, we'd love to see a much broader. And that was the whole point back in August, or actually it was June of 21, when it was delayed for 2 months, and it wasn't done.
So can I answer that question first? So do apologize if I misstated, but the current study, there is no requirement for them to analyze or consider additional intersections or a broader traffic system. Traffic engineering has the ability to ask for that as part of their review, but their basis for doing that has to be supported by what the city has for its traffic control manual, which kind of guides and dictates their decision-making kind of process with respect to land use applications.
So question number 2 is hillside overlay. It's a little bit open to interpretation. And so this actually is going to be a question for you, Andrea. Did you change your rendition of the apartments in areas that you've mapped out? I didn't get a chance to look at those beforehand.
So have we changed them from the ones we presented at City Council last year? No, they are exactly the same.
Okay. Daniel, I'd like you to go into the record a year ago and take a look at what the Mountain Shadows Working Group presented, because they're falsely representing the heights of those buildings. Those light standards in the parking lot have been measured many different ways and are 32 feet tall, right in the middle of a 3-story building. It doesn't work.
So what I will say to that regard is this is a new application. So we are considering it based on what has been presented and provided to city staff for its review. The renderings that have been presented here tonight are not a requirement of a concept plan. If it's entered into the record and it's added to their proposal package, yes, it's something that we look at. It's something that the decision makers that will ultimately render a decision on the project applications can look at. But we are not, under this project, we don't go back and look at the previous submittal. The decision on that project has been made, and we're looking at these 2 applications.
I'm gonna go to somebody who hasn't asked a question yet, and we'll come back.
Okay.
Okay.
I have more of a question statement, a couple of them. We purchased our home, we live in Mountain Shadows, and we're right up against the hill. Surprise to us, one morning we got up and there were tractors and backhoes and everything all behind us, building a great big pond when we bought the house for the sloping up into the mountain. There was nothing behind us and no nothing that we knew of to build. So
with regards to the grading and movement of dirt, but I don't know the specifics of your situation. I'm happy to research that and provide you some additional context.
my next question is number 2. Have you guys even, I mean, we moved there because it's quiet, very quiet. We have the wildlife all around us. I've got the sheep coming right down to our street. I mean, I've got pictures of them like crazy. Have you thought about the noise of all these apartments and or houses that you're gonna build that's gonna reflect on all of us? Yes, no? You don't care?
You don't care.
This is a property which has a potential for development of some sort, which will change the character of the property. And with that, there will be changes in the character of the nature of the environment and in terms of additional noise. This multifamily residential is not like to generate any greater noise than another office or industrial use. That would be my answer to that. But you did, sorry? Yes, clearly the proposal is to develop the property to help support the viability of this site and with infill development which is supported by the city comprehensive plan. You did ask a question about whether we are going to do similar excavation on the property. I mean, obviously there will be grading on the property that meets the hillside requirements, but we will be providing detention ponds, stormwater detention ponds, as I noted on the plan previously. So we will be having stormwater detention, but that will all be part of the development plan and will be approved by the city. It won't be a random act of grading, which you seem to be referring to.
Hi, I just want to say the only thing that will stop this project is not complying with city code. That's what stopped the first project a year ago, and the city attorney, I'm going to read this again, said this project is not appropriate under the city's rezoning code. They have not made any changes to their plan. They're going to move through with the same plan. So my question now is to the city. Why is the city allowing this developer to continue when the city knows that this does not comply with city code?
So sir, just before I answer your question, I just want to let everybody know that we're at about 10 minutes before the reservation of this space for this meeting expires. But to answer your question is, I can't speak to the ongoing litigation and the statements of the city attorney with respect to the previous decision. All we can do as staff and reviewing is look at the current context and parameters of the current applications, and under city code, if a project was denied, the developer, the applicant has the legal right to resubmit that project for reconsideration after a 12-month period, which that is what they are doing.
Right, but there's been no changes to the plan.
There's no requirement in city code for them to make changes. The only requirement of city code to make substantial changes is if they would want to reduce that 12-month window.
You have a question over here?
Yeah, Frank Castaldo. I live on Granby Circle. My question is, what if this would be, I would think it would be your responsibility under your office, what sets off the requirement for either an environmental assessment or if needed greater, a environmental impact statement?
The only requirements of city code that get into any kind of element or aspect to that subject matter is our land suitability analysis, but there is nothing in code that requires any land use application that comes before the city to do an environmental impact study.
Hi, I'm Roger Ross, and I live in Colorado. I live right up the street here, and I think I've heard a lot of our neighbors and everything that is against this, and I think that all we want to be is just heard. We, the people, want to be heard within this.
And that's why we asked, just to respond, that's why we asked the project team, regardless of the conversations and decisions that were previously made, that is why we asked them to have this neighborhood meeting here tonight.
My name is Karen Rechtenwald. I live in Mountain Shadows, and this is for the developer. And I just want to thank you for coming to the meeting. I'm wondering if your company might consider like committee meetings with residents to discuss some of the things that have been brought up tonight, like different kinds of uses for the property that would benefit the community and also have your interest in mind, other than residential.
So, to answer your question, the alternative uses to the site is, you know, that's something that if you were the property owner, you could bring forward. But in this case, you're not the property owner. We're looking to develop a cohesive plan that will strengthen the office building and allow the overall 100 and some acres to thrive within itself. In terms of looking at other alternative uses, at this point we're pretty firm in trying to proceed with the PUD and the permitted uses that we have put forth within the plan, as well as the measures we've taken to sort of, I can't think of the words off the top of my head, but to, you know, we're agreeing to the 150-foot setback and the 2-story buildings up in the front, even though that's not part of the code. We've reduced our number of units from over 500 down to 420, and that's all through the past interaction with the neighborhood association and the past efforts. So we feel we have heard several of the key issues that the neighborhood is bringing forward, and we've tried to implement things to address those while simultaneously still being have economic viability on the site.
And I think this will be the last question for tonight because we're getting close to the end. If you'd like one, we'd consider it.
No, please, we have enough. What is the, I guess, the total building, the commercial building capacity? And not that you should have studied this, but have you looked at what if that thing is full, plus we got all the residentials? What does that impact look like?
So, impact in what context? Traffic, are you thinking primarily?
Traffic, safety, all the above.
So, I can answer that in a couple of ways. The building is currently approximately 37% occupied. It was, when we started this, it was about 41% occupied, 37 now. So, the traffic study assumes 100% occupancy of the building. And together with the additional residential, and it assumes all residential rather than the mix of uses that we say as have as a possibility. So it assumed the worst case scenario: 100% occupancy of the building and 100% residential development out of the 420 units. So in terms of the capacity for traffic, that was assessed at the worst case scenario. And in reality, will the building ever be 100% occupied? No. I mean, they would be happy if it was 60, 70, 80% occupied. But we assumed 100% occupation. In terms of parking, as I mentioned before, we looked at that exchange of parking in terms of what's needed to support the existing buildings in office use versus what the exchange would be for the residential use. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, with that then, we're going to wrap up. We really appreciate everybody coming out. We appreciate your questions and comments. Please make sure you sign in. That way Dan can keep in touch with you. And we can keep in touch with you as well. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.